The next and last item today is item number 21, application for a certificate of appropriateness at 346 Broadway, the former New York Life Insurance Company building, an individual and interior landmark, docket number 16-2730, block 170, lot 6. A neo-Italian Renaissance-style monumental skyscraper with neo-Italian Renaissance-style interiors designed by Stephen D. Hatch and McKim, Mead & White and built in 1894 to 98. This is an application to construct a rooftop addition and bulkheads, replace windows, install a canopy, alter the facades, and relocate and alter interior finishes.
Preservation staff. 346 Broadway is an individual and interior landmark, a full block building done by Lafayette Street, Leonard Street, Captain Lane, and Broadway. This is an application to adapt the building for residential use, including construction of rooftop additions, changes to building entrances, window replacement, and the relocation of portions of the interiors. Don Peebles is going to introduce the proposal.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you this afternoon. I'm Don Peebles, and I'm the chairman of the Peebles Corporation, and we are co-developing this building with the Allied Group. And I just wanted to take a moment to kind of set the tone for how we've approached development on this site, or the restoration of this property. And give you a little bit of history of our company and also a little bit of the history of the Allied Group. Our company, I founded our company in 1986 in Washington, D.C. And from the inception of our, turn this off. From the inception of our company in 1986, we began our work with historically designated properties. I started the business in Washington, D.C. The first building that we developed, and the first project we developed, involved the restoration of a landmark building in a historic district in Washington, D.C. Throughout our company's history, we went through a process of restoring, we owned and restored the stables where John Wilkes Booth stored his getaway horse next to Ford's Theater. We restored and converted the original Savings and Loan Bank building, the oldest savings and loan bank building in Washington, D.C., and converted that into a hotel. And it was done not only through a process with the city's landmark board, but also the Department of Interior. We have developed buildings in the Union Station Historic District in Washington, D.C., including Amtrak trains, corporate headquarters. Additionally, we have restored and converted historically designated properties in Miami Beach, Florida, as well as San Francisco, California. And when we had the opportunity to pursue acquiring 346 Broadway, also known as 108 Leonard, we were attracted to it because it was a forte that we had developed as a company throughout our history, which is restoring and converting landmark buildings and having the opportunity to be entrusted with buildings that have a great significance of our country's history. In fact, as we speak, our company is also restoring the original family court building in Philadelphia that is on the Ben Franklin Parkway. And that is another landmark building. And in fact, John Byer and his firm are the architects for that property as well. So this is now the second opportunity that we are having the opportunity to work together. And again, that is now a court building being converted into hospitality, into a hotel, a Kempton Hotel. Our company today is a company that we have under development, over $2 billion of active development projects right now, comprising over 2 million square feet, a pipeline of various levels of negotiation right now to expand that by another $1.7 billion and 1.2 million square feet. We do business in Washington, D.C. We have an active project going in Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, New York, Boston, Massachusetts, as well as 3 major developments in Miami, Florida. So we're very active. When we decided to pursue this property, we recognized that this building required a great deal of care, and we were the custodians of a very important building. And so when we looked at the task ahead, I made a decision that it was important for us to not do this by ourselves, but to bring in talented, experienced partner that had the proven history in New York of restoring landmark buildings, converting landmark buildings, and bringing them back to their original character, and basically leaving these buildings as better than when they found them, and bringing back their historic character. And so when we made that decision to bring in a partner, there really was only one partner we felt that had that bill, that specialized in historic restoration as well, and that was the Elad Group. And the Elad Group, they have a proven history. They did the restoration and the conversion of the Plaza Hotel, one of the world's foremost landmarks, 250 West Street here in downtown, 655 6th and 225 5th Avenue. So they have done a tremendous amount of restoration and share the same commitment to preservation as we do. And when we made a selection of who to entrust, because this is ultimately the preservation of a landmark building is only as good as a firm who takes the lead in preserving it and bringing it to life again. And so there was no other option for us. Again, the clearest choice by far was John Beyer, who has a proven history throughout his entire career of being entrusted with landmark buildings in New York City and some of our nation's landmarks, such as the United States Capitol. And so we were pleased to be able to have the opportunity to work with John. And what I'd like to leave you with here is that you have a development team whose commitment it is to restoring this beautiful treasure. And we see the restoration and preservation of this building is good for business. And throughout each of our company's histories, we have proven that preservation actually results in good, solid economics. And that was proven with a lot with the Plaza. Our Marriott Hotel in Washington is one of the top 5 performers globally that we converted that bank building into. And so we share a passion and understand the great responsibility that we are entrusted with to preserving this building. And we appreciate the opportunity to be here. And I'll now hand it off to John. Thank you.
Thank you. Kate Lemos is going to help me go through our presentation quickly, and we want you to follow along with your double-page book, because you have the 2 images together. We're going to be only showing one at a time here because of the PowerPoint, and we want you to just realize that we're dealing with a complex building of over 427,000 square feet, which has 10 interior designated landmark spaces. So we want to make sure we have enough time to describe that, but we want to go through our points. And our first point is Kate describing the historic context.
Sure. Thanks, Jeff. Kate Lemos McHale, Beyer Linder Bell. First, here's the building. It's located on the very large city block between Broadway and Lafayette at Leonard Street. It's an individual landmark designated in 1987, and also the interiors were designated at the same time. The building has a very interesting history. I'll give you the highlights. It's the original home of the New York Life Insurance Company, which you see here, which was built on Broadway. In the 1890s, a design competition was held to expand all the way to Lafayette. That design was completed by Stephen Hatch. It's a 12-story building. He passed away as construction was beginning, and McKim, Mead & White were commissioned to complete the building, and the company decided to expand back to Broadway, replacing their original building at the same height of 12 stories with the clock tower facing Broadway. Here we have a rendered view of that building as completed. It was completed in 1898. Over time, there have been a few changes, mostly at the roof line. Originally, there was just some 13th floor kind of mezzanine happening at the roof at the east end. As you can see, historically, always roof construction has been visible. At some point, after original construction, the 13th floor was completed all the way to the west. It's built right up against the parapet here. And we've also lost some architectural features at Broadway, and also, of course, the beautiful globe that was on top of the clock tower. Here's just some before and after photos of the building and its context as it's changed over time. Getting to the interiors, the building was designated with these interior landmarks under city ownership in 1987. And as you can see, we have a number of different spaces, and I just want to point out, we understand, of course, that interior designation is all regulated the same. We, as part of our planning and design study, really found that there's a hierarchy of architectural significance evident among these spaces. And what we see are very grand, two-story spaces with very fine marble work, polychromed plaster work, and those really are the primary spaces. And then we do have office spaces upward into the building, a 13-story exit stair, and also, of course, the clock tower space. And these are just some images of those spaces. We're going to get to these in the proposal, so we'll go quickly. This is the Leonard Street lobby. This is the banking hall, a historically grand space. And these are some of those offices and the clock tower space on the upper floors. We looked a lot at the interior landmarks throughout the city, and we found that this is a unique situation. The only other interior designated space on an upper floor that is not connected to main, large main spaces is the Rainbow Room in Rockefeller Center. And we also noted a lot of very beautiful interior spaces that have yet to be designated. Now back to Jack for the adaptive reuse.
So the second part of our presentation is to describe to you how we are planning the adaptive reuse of this building from a New York City-owned, basically office building, to a privately developed residential building that will be essentially owned by 144 condominium owners. In doing that, we looked at two ways of approaching the layout. This building is 400 feet long and presently has one core. Its dimensions are such that the second means of egress are in fire escapes that were added to the building for safety reasons. We could continue this layout under the 1968 code by a special permit from the Department of Buildings. The 2008 code, however, would not permit that, and we would be required to provide egress in two more locations, and our proposal is to create 2 additional cores, 3 in total, because the building being 400 feet long just doesn't work with a single core. Next. The plans illustrate, and on your book you can see the plans opposite the diagram. This shows the the cores of the 3 locations, east, center, and west, as opposed to if we had 2 cores, which we would be permitted to do one without affecting the landmark on the west side, and the center core. This is a section illustrating the idea of the 3 cores. Shown and hatched, and look at your drawings carefully, the hatched areas are the designated landmarks, as shown previously. The core here will go through 2 spaces, totaling 1,200 square feet. The total designated landmark space in the building is 20,000 square feet. So approximately 4.4% of the designated spaces, which we consider to be secondary spaces, would be affected by this core. And affected in the sense that we would remove those finishes and place them in another location. They would not be lost, they would be relocated. moving along, this would be a section of the plan where we would not have a third core. Quickly going through the plans. The top plan is the existing, the lower plan is proposed. Shown in red is the main Leonard Street lobby, remaining the lobby. We're also adding at this location a community facility. This is the first floor, which is the upper level of the Leonard Street lobby, remaining that, completely restored. And this is the best historic space in the building, the banking hall, and it will be restored. And the stair that is located here, which is affected by the core, is being moved to this location as a new entrance to the banking hall commercial space, which will be more visible and in a much more public location. Next, we have the second floor, which is the mezzanine of the banking hall, which will remain as is, as a commercial space. This space, which is a office space on the second floor designated, has the stair, as I mentioned, which will be moved to the floor below. The rest of this space will become part of an apartment which will be restored. The fourth floor, going on and on with the various interior designated spaces, we have a president's suite which has a very attractive marble finish office, which will be affected by this core, which we propose to move to the ground floor next to the lobby. This shows the stair that goes from the first floor to the 13th floor all the way through the building, designated fire stair, which we will restore. There's the 13th floor version of that. On the 13th floor, where we have a non-original portion, we have non-original portions of the original building. We have additions to the original building on the 13th floor that are not in good condition. We plan on rebuilding them, but rebuilding them in a slightly different way by setting them back from the perimeter. The current 13th floor is 18,000 square feet. The proposed 13th floor will be 16,000 square feet. On the floor above, we're proposing 2 penthouse additions. We consider to be minimally visible. We'll show you that in a minute. The total of the penthouse additions and the 13th floor will add only 500 square feet to this 427,000 square foot building. Moving along, on the clock tower, designated has really three levels. This level is a large space with high ceilings with a spiral stair accessing the clock tower mechanism above, next, shown here. The clock tower mechanism will be kept in its location, the building area around it restored, waterproof, so that it remains as a clock. We will now go through the third part of our presentation, which is the restoration of this incredible, magnificent McKim-Mead & White landmark. First, the existing conditions and changes over time. All the windows were replaced in the 1970s, before designation. The fire escape was added way before the Second World War, and created a lot of scar tissue. Parking entrances were added at some point. These are additions to the roof, and we also are showing missing pieces, which is the dome at the top, which we are not proposing at this public hearing for your review. We'll come back if we have a proposal for that. This is removal of the portico that Kate mentioned. Next. Looking at your book, you'll see these drawings side by side, existing and proposed. Our proposed elevations show all new windows, the removal of the fire escape, and the creation of a balcony in the location of the fire escape. 2 automobile entrances, not 3. There are presently 110 parking spaces. We're proposing 40. We're restoring the entrances all the way around. This is the beautiful Leonard Street entrance. You'll see that in a moment. We're proposing to rebuild the 13th floor in a glass and steel structure very, very minimal, very, very much part of the sort of the sky tone, and you will see from our sketches, minimally visible. 2 additions, similarly in glass, where the zoning permits a higher space, and then perhaps the globe being built in the future. I'll go through these. You can leaf through your drawings. We're showing alternately the existing drawings and proposed restoration next to proposed elevations. There is a significant amount of exterior restoration that we will be doing, all of which is keyed. We will work with your staff on a regular basis to keep that work under careful review and approval. And as we go through the drawings, and I'll go through these quickly, you'll see there's a great number of them. One of the major issues of restoration, I'll keep on talking while you go through this, Kate, is the parapet on the roof, which is in poor condition. One of the reasons for the scaffolding around the building is that stones have been falling for over 10 years. The scaffolds have been there for 10 years. So there's a lot to do on the parapet. Let's go through these and showing the proposed elevations. This is Catherine Lane. Conditions, we have the terracotta and brick on Catherine Lane, and on the main elevations on Leonard Street and the others is a Tuckahoe white marble, available still for patching in New York State. Next, these are the elevations on Leonard and Broadway, all the points of restoration, the proposed work. We'll show you more three-dimensionally about this in a minute. Next. The Firescape is an important proposal that we have for you, in that the original Firescape created a great number of scars that are visible, and including the parapet removal at the very top, the creation of entry doors to the building through windows that permitted access to the firescapes. Our proposal is to remove the firescape. We don't need it. To patch all the scar tissue, and to take the firescape and make it into a 15-foot long, I'm having trouble with my pointer here. Yeah. Which one, the first one, the top one? This is the firescape we're proposing. It's shorter in distance. Let me see, I've got 3 now. Maybe I'll do it also left and right. I'm ambidextrous. So the firescape is a bit shorter, but the same length as the one that exists. Next.
You're ready to show that.
What's that?
You've got the remote.
Oh, you got this. Oh, I thought hey, why did you give me that? Boy, we have bad song and dance act today. Okay, this is working. There's a section. The original firescape was 7 feet, 2 inches. Projecting over the sidewalk, we're only 4 foot 8 inches, which is all we are permitted to do by code. We're going to be replicating the original handrail, and maintaining the opening for the door, but putting a new door in. The next item is the restoration of the Leonard Street lobby, which is a wooden structure. This is an original photograph. This is the current view with the scaffolding. There it is. That will be completely restored and in wood. And we were proposing to put a new fanlight grill back where it was originally, a new vestibule and marquee, all of which will be painted and coordinated with a conservation study we now have well underway, which we will submit to you. And the exact color and nature of it will be decided with you. Next. So here's a rendering of it, and you can see here the 2 doors to the parking area being kept, but also completely replaced with new. The 3rd door, which is here, will be a pedestrian entrance. This is the Leonard Street facade showing the other entrances, the one I just mentioned, and then access to the community facility. We're now on Broadway, where the original freestanding portico was removed. This is the existing. We have a two-story semicircular loggia, which is very lovely, but the entranceway is gone. We have to replace it. Here's the loggia. Here's the proposal for the new entranceway, because the original and the existing doors don't meet code, so we had to change that. And we are proposing to add a fence and a gate at the entrance for security purposes, and being inspired by McKim-Mead and White gate and fence at the Barry Savings Bank in New York, and another one at Apthorpe apartment building. I'm going fast because I know we have a lot to do, and you have many, many other testimonies. But tell me if I'm going too fast. The original facade on Lafayette Street had 5 doors. The current building has 2 doors, and we are proposing 3, all of which is going to be restored. This is for the main entrance, which is cast iron, which is very lovely, will be painted, as I said, with a color to be determined. This is the entrance to the community facility on Lafayette Street. This is the entrance into the banking hall at the lower level, which will have the new stair that we've moved, visible through this window and very attractively available to the general public. With regard to other interventions for service doors and so forth, they're shown here, 2 of which exist, 1 of which is new. Windows. Every window is being replaced. We're lucky there was 1 window left out of 1,400 that we found, that we've been able to determine the character of it, the material, the profiles. It's a wood, it's a copper-clad wood. So that's shown in red in all the drawings. The existing kind of crude panning of the windows when they were replaced will be removed, and we will follow the profile very closely of the original, as you can see, in our proposal. And that our daylight opening is well below the 6%, which is the LPC standard for new windows. Moving along with the windows, we have squared windows, we have 1-story arch windows, and we have 2-story arch windows.
Can I ask just a question about that?
Yeah.
The panning is covering a piece of wood trim?
Yeah, this frame is being retained, but it will be clad and in exactly the same profile. We can't keep that because of the way by which the new aluminum window has to sort of fit into the masonry. Moving along, the roofs, okay, roofscape. This is the next to last piece of our presentation. I don't know how I'm doing on time, but the roofscape is a significant, amazing place. It is 24,000 square feet. It's like an aircraft carrier. It's 400 feet long. It's magnificent. And we are intending to make it a kind of a green village. But we also have to deal with a significant amount of deterioration, failure of certain elements, and a kind of chaos. Next. So this is a view of the same bird's eye photo of this little kind of green village. We have a 12,000 square foot common roof terrace for the owners of the building, which is shown here. Next slide. And we are creating a series of places both for the common use of the building as well as the residents. So these are the 2 penthouses that I mentioned that we're adding. This is the continuous rebuilding of the 13th floor in glass, which is minimally visible from the street. This is this wonderful East Pavilion dome space and a variety of other amenities. This is the floor plan showing that. The parapet is another significant issue to be considered. It is in poor condition. It is extremely high. It's 9 feet 8 inches off the present floor on the highest elements, which are the curved piers, and 7 feet 5 inches, I think, at this point, which is the lowest portion of the parapet. So the lowest portion is way up here, and it has tiny openings. 1 foot 3 inch openings in a 7 foot 5 inch space, parapet. Since the condition is not good for most of the parapet, we are proposing to redesign and redo the parapet next. And you can see it on your drawings, they're side by side. So instead of the 3 foot high opening, we're proposing to make it 3 feet high and have it 9 inches wide. And it's based on this proportion, this actual existing parapet on the East Pavilion, which gave us the shape and permits us to create a see-through balustrade parapet. The materials of that we're working on and studying. We're looking at precast. We're also looking at the possibility of actually keeping the stone and changing the existing stone by cutting it with a high pressure water gun. This is all to be determined, but our goal is to have flexibility in that material, which we will work with your staff on, and also to naturally create a much more attractive place for the residents. This is a blow-up elevation of the typical 13th floor. This is the existing 13th floor, only inches away from this very, very high parapet. Little sketch showing the design of that unit. The East Pavilion, which was on the original building and originally had a clock, there it is, here. This sign in this drawing just indicates what was intended before the clock was built there. This sign was never built. Our proposal is to open all 4 sides of the pavilion to windows. There's windows on one side, and we propose them on 4 sides. There's the side it's on. We're proposing to link the pavilion to the penthouse on that roof, shown here. Sight lines of the roofscape. These are the basic diagrams of the various widths of street, heights of buildings, all around our wonderful building. I'm going to walk around now quickly and point out points of visibility. We are going to walk all the way around the building and see what we have as sight lines. Existing on the left, proposed on the right, no visibility. Next. What you will see when we come back to you with a proposal is maybe this globe on top of the building will be visible at this close vantage. Stepping back, we have an existing view. These drawings show mock-ups. The red portion of the mock-up is structure. The white portion, which is not on this particular photo, is glass, handrail above. This element is proposed to be, and will be visible, a cooling tower. It replaces what is already there as a water tower. So we felt that was a good trade-off. Stepping back, this is the view of the mock-up of the penthouse adjacent to the clock tower, and there is its view from this location. We're now on Lafayette Street. No visibility there yet. Very little visibility here. This is the mock-up. This is the piece of penthouse. Further away, the mock-up, the rendering. Another view north from Center Street, a piece of the penthouse here. This is the upper penthouse, which is the 14th floor. Virtually none of the 13th floors is visible. This is an elevator that we're proposing that was originally in this location but removed, and we have those floor plans. We're proposing to use that elevator for new elevators. Lafayette again from Franklin Street, very minimal visibility. On this we call the fire drill photo. This was taken by one of your staff members at a fire drill, and they discovered when they were forced out of the building, there was a view of the mock-up that we missed. So we wanted to make sure we brought it back and showed you that. And that is also minimally visible. Although I must say that this was a view we did miss. That's the mock-up in wood. Red is the structure, white is the glass. And here is the rendering. And the little bit of red you see in both of these pieces is not our building, but it's the big building behind it. I wanted to remind you that big building behind us has nothing to do with our proposal. Getting towards the end of this, next to last piece. Benson Street is a little alley. It shows the mock-up, which is the new elevator we're proposing. That was an original location. Further back, we're way back on Canal Street almost. Same thing, the mock-up, the new elevator proposal. Okay, we're on the last piece, which I had to have last because you had to understand the whole building. But in my judgment, this is one of the most important things we're all doing together. It's the interiors. It's an amazingly unique, complicated subject. Well, all these interiors are designated. We're going from a public building to a privately developed building. And we have spaces that we are given levels of intervention. Just like we kind of gave the designation levels of importance. The most important thing is restoration in this color. So the primary spaces that we think are primary, I hope you all agree, will be restored as is, completely, perfectly, and used for essentially publicly oriented functions, which is the intention of the law. In fact, you can't designate a space in New York, at least, that isn't open to the public. So that's one of the dilemmas here, that some of the spaces can't be open to the public with the transfer from a public entity to a private developer. The next category is rehabilitation in green, which are the spaces that we felt were secondary, and they are the office space on the 4th floor, office space on the 2nd floor of the clock tower. And then there's two spaces, as I mentioned, 1,200 square feet out of 27,000 square feet, where we are moving historic fabric. This is the stair, and this is the marble room, both of which get moved, and I'll show you where they go. Here is the same thing in section. Actually, we're treating the fire stair as a pure restoration because there's nothing you have to do except restore it because it's all there and we're using it for a fire stair. So this is the key issue. This is where our core, this is the key fundamental issue in our whole design. Our core goes through these two spaces. Quickly going around with the interiors. The Leonard Street lobby will be restored. It will be restored exactly and perfectly as it was when it was built. The elevator lobby is lost. I mean, you look at your book, you can see that area is other than the columns, the detail is gone. We are proposing to bring that detail back, but we're also proposing to remove the elevators, which are about 3 feet by about 4 feet. They're completely dysfunctional. So we're going to have them moved, and you'll walk right through to a new lounge we're making and mailroom as an extension of the lobby for the owners of the building, and also as a more public space for people to go to. This is a section elevation looking towards the front door, so we're looking that way. This is an elevation looking at the walkway through the elevator lobby, and this clock was originally there. It's shown in one of our drawings, and it was moved to another location, actually the Broadway corridor. So we plan on moving it back next. Here are the details that give us very, very good information about how to restore that entire facade, but with the elimination of the elevators. None of the elevator doors, none of the elevators are original. Only the colonnettes exist, but we're going to restore the whole surround. The Broadway corridor is not designated, and here we are voluntarily recommending that it be restored. Why? Because it's an important connection between Broadway and the Leonard Street lobby, and we feel it's a give back because we are taking something away. We feel this is something that we're giving to make this building more continuous in terms of its restored continuity. Next. Oh, one other thing. Let's just go back. Sorry, one quick. This conference room, we'll show you more on that, is where the 4th floor marble room will be located and moved to, because it's on this restored corridor. So these are views of the restoration of the Broadway corridor. This is a rendering of it being restored. It's all marble. Most of the marble included in the great number of designated rooms have been painted. It has been painted, and much of the woodwork has been painted. Here, we're going to restore the existing marble and replace it where it's missing. The banqueting hall is a real beautiful space. It needs the least amount of work and would be a very fine commercial space. It's clad with marble. We plan on bringing the handrails up to code. They're too low. But it is suitable for a commercial use, such as a restaurant, which we're illustrating here. It may not be a restaurant, it'll be a commercial space, which means that it's more open to the public. And this door is the door that will take you to the stair that we're moving to access this from the ground floor, because you can't access a commercial space from the residential lobby. And here's that stair. It's located here. This is the banqueting hall. This is the 2nd floor office. This is the stair. I mean, it's a nice stair, but it's not breathtaking. It's cast iron, wood handrail, but it's all marble, solid marble treads. We're going to move it piece by piece to this location. It will be next to a window so people can see it. This is facing east. The sun will come in and highlight it. It's in a better location, in my mind, in terms of its accessibility and visibility to the public. The 2nd floor offices, the remaining 2nd floor offices will be a residential apartment, and we will restore all the perimeter finishes and decorative elements. But there will be parts of the building of the floor plan that will be modified for bedrooms, bathrooms, and so forth. Next. This is the second floor offices, just shown in a little bit more detail. This is the 4th floor office, which is a marble room here where the cores could be located that we're moving. And this is the remaining of the office space that will be incorporated into an apartment and restored. Let's go to the view of the moved 4th floor room, and this shows that the floor elevation, this building has a dozen different floor-to-floor heights out of 15 floors. We are moving a marble from one height to another, which is 1 foot less high to the 1st floor than where it is on the 4th floor. And we have analyzed where we can remove elements of the marble so that you won't know it when you see it, that it's been reduced by 1 foot 9 inches in various locations, and it's going here. And that will look like this, where the original marble elements, as much as possible, can be moved in fact. There are cracked panels that may require replacement. And those are Italian marbles that we know where they came from. The clock tower, which is the next to last item on this long list of interior designated spaces is a remarkable, sort of a matter-of-fact space housing a unique clock. This is a section through it. You have a high ceiling space with a very simple industrial spiral stairway in a room that has windows on 4 sides but doors on 1. It has a spiral stair, and the attic for the clock is here, next. There's this we're proposing that to this room be restored. The spiral stair remains in place. It doesn't need anything except cleaning and probably repainting. This is the plan of the clock tower today. We propose to introduce an elevator, which you have to get to it, and a stair, but we'll keep the spiral stair where it is. The key thing about the clock tower, of course, is the clock. And it's in a mechanism above this space, up here, next, so that when this is existing, this is proposed, so that the clock being kept can be accessed and be made watertight and restored. And we're proposing to open up the 3 doors, proposing to create 3 new doors similar to the 1 door on all 4 sides, because we have a terrace all the way around this building, around this room. Lastly, the stair, this incredible fire stair, 13-story fire stair, also nice but not earth-shaking, originally didn't have a door. It was originally open to the corridor, shown here. This little piece of the balustrade is gone, but this shows it open. So, in order to try to convey to the public that this stair is important, we propose to add a glass door, fire-rated glass door, at the base of the building, so you can see the stair. Parenthetically, we're also applying to the building department to not have any glass door there. We're hopeful, and that would mean that would look like this, and we wouldn't have to have any glass. But that's a special reconsideration. We can't propose it because we don't know whether we'll get it, but I want you to know we're thinking about it. I am now finished, and I'm happy to, I hope you feel happy about that, and I'm here to answer any questions if I'm able, actually.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Actually, it was a very well organized and detailed presentation.
Thank you.
Questions? Yes, Michael, and then Ari.
Thank you.
If I
Yes,
may.
please.
One, I guess these should be aimed at Kate, talking about the historic, sorry. What criteria did you use to determine what would be primary and secondary historic spaces inside?
Well, we looked at the architecture of the spaces, and we looked also at the level of finish and the level of kind of care that went into the design. And we did see, especially in those 2-story sort of grand spaces, quite a lot of attention, marble finishes, very beautiful plasterwork. The other spaces on the 2nd and 4th floor also have beautiful finishes, but of a somewhat lesser level, we'll say. There's more plaster or wood rather than marble. And then on the clock tower, is a very unique space, and the clock itself is very special, but it's painted brick. So on a level of sort of architectural significance, we granted that a lower in our assessment.
So no Park Service or no ECOMOS criteria? It was all sort of in-house criteria? Okay. The parapet, the Catherine Lane balustrade is terracotta. The Leonard Street is stone. Is it also Tuckahoe?
Yes.
Which is possibly the worst marble ever devised by God. But I'm curious to know. I mean, clearly there was an historic differentiation. Do you know what that was, and is one more important? And why did you then determine to make the entire parapet a monolithic construct?
I think it dates to the 2 different architects We see on the
Presumably,
hatch drawings the detail of the terracotta. It's interesting that the marble is Leonard Street and then wraps Lafayette, so I'm not really sure, but the entire Catherine Lane elevation is done in terracotta and brick, so it's consistent with that construction. The condition is bad throughout, and it's being held up right now with steel supports, and you have the sidewalk bridge around the whole building. But the design decision really was to do something consistently around the building to allow that opening that Jack described.
But essentially, what you're doing by doing that is saying that the differentiation, that original differentiation, is not important.
You do
In a
lose
way.
that somewhat, but our treatment is material-based. So even though that opening would be the same around the building, we would replace the terracotta to match that material and replace, or hopefully reuse, the marble to match that material. So
Just one point that I'd like to make about the terracotta. We are proposing a precast replacement of the deteriorated terracotta and brick to be a finish with the striated finish of a semi-glazed terracotta, which we have a sample of here. Incidentally, we have materials here, and all of the coursing of the terracotta in precast.
Yeah, my consideration is not so much the material, but it's that you have one historic treatment of the parapet in one area. You've got another historic treatment of the parapet in another area, and you are proposing to make that one uniform, thereby obliterating, if you will, that historic differentiation. I'm just curious about...
I wouldn't use the word obliterate, but you are right.
Of course you would. And just one other thing. On LPC 81, you've got a Greek key in your proposal that doesn't appear in the historic photograph. Are you adding detail, or are you bringing back detail that has...
Which one now?
LPC 81.
81? Okay, we'll go to that.
In the upper left-hand photo, there's no Greek key in that frieze. You apparently have one on the right-hand side. Are you bringing back a key that was there and has been, pardon the term, obliterated? Or are you... Go up. Here we are. There you are. Was there something there that you're bringing back, or are you adding?
It's all there.
Okay, all right, great.
No,
Thank you.
Actually, that does need repair, but that's what's there from the original.
Cool. Thank you.
Do you have a question? Okay.
Yes, I have one.
Okay, go ahead. And then Michael, and then Roberta.
Two questions, maybe one. The clock tower, is it open to the public? How? No, in your proposal,
No.
in the proposal.
No, it is sold as part of an apartment.
So where does it end up? It's in an apartment?
The clock tower will be included in the purchase of a triplex apartment at the west end of the building.
Do you mind taking us to where you get into that
Sure.
apartment?
Maybe Inception. Or what's closest to this point? Here. No, I think that we have to go, all right, here, this is it. This doesn't illustrate the proposal, but it illustrates what's there. This is the clock tower room.
Yes.
This is the clock, this is not a section in this area, this is the clock tower mechanism in here, a photograph of which you have. This and the two floors below form an apartment.
But the beginning of the clock tower happens does it happen at your 13th floor?
The clock tower happens at the
The level of the terrace, right?
This floor is the 14th floor.
Right. So basically, so your new garden, your new landscape is actually at the base of that?
This is actually at the 13th floor. It's
Is
a
it
little bit
13th?
above
Sorry.
the 13th floor.
I'm trying to understand if it's possible to get onto the terrace level, and from the terrace level to access that tower, this part of the tower,
For the public.
for let's call it some version of a public, for more than just the owner of the apartment below.
Well, first of all, the roof is accessible only to the owners of the building.
Right, which is why I said a sort of a public, because let's say it's the group of owners for the moment, rather than the public at large. But I just want to understand about whether or not,
You can, right?
What's that?
You will be able to access it, can't you? Or is it the only way to
Well,
access?
you can access it, but it is a private apartment.
well, maybe. I mean,
Our proposal
Right.
is to make it a private apartment.
no, I understand, and I'm asking
Okay,
a
here we
question
go.
about that.
Here we go. This unit is a duplex for this, and this is a triplex for this. This terrace, which incidentally has amazing sculpture, eagle sculptures, which we're restoring,
Beautiful.
is a private terrace.
In the proposal.
Currently
Right.
planned.
Because I want to go back to your point about, the designation of these interiors for the public benefit. And it seems to me that this is especially an interior that warrants that kind of public interaction. But so I just ask whether or not there is the possibility of accessing it by at least the whole roofscape, if in fact it didn't belong exclusively to the owner below.
Well, the answer is, it is possible, but it is not our intention to do that.
And Commissioners, if I can just jump in here a little bit, the issue of public access to these spaces, of course, issues that have come up. And the landmarks law requires public accessibility to designate space. There's no power under the landmarks law to require interior designated spaces to remain public. And it's something that we've seen in modified form when security has gone into lobbies to prevent the public from going in now. And it's a reason that I would posit why there's only one other upper floor designated space that's not connected to a ground floor space, as the applicant has pointed out. These spaces are interspersed throughout this. They were accessible, I would point out, only because the city owned the building. They were not designed to be public in any way, and they were available, publicly accessible for a period of time on and off when the city owned it. For example, one of these rooms was a computer room that's currently off, the public can't go to. So the commission cannot require that they remain open to the public. It does raise questions about when we will be working with the applicants if this proposal is approved to provide for periodic inspections of these spaces and stuff like that, but there's no power to require them to remain open.
That which was my question. I mean, if the owner of the unit on the fourth floor decides to redecorate, he's got to submit to landmarks.
It's an awkward situation, no doubt.
But is that true?
Yes.
He does have to.
Anything that would require affixing something to some of these spaces, some of these identified architectural features, yes, he would.
I presume that's an E-hour clock. It's probably worth $100,000. If he decides to sell it on eBay, is he allowed to do that?
No, he's not allowed. He's not allowed to remove the clock, and there's no proposal to remove the clock. The mechanism.
So the owner of that unit, those were some of my questions. The owner of that unit would presumably have to grant the management the permission to maintain that clock, however often as it needs to be maintained.
That's a question. I would also point out that there's nothing in the landmarks law that requires or gives the commission the power to require that this mechanism remain operable. The law talks about maintenance of features, It does not, whether it's electrified or someone is allowed to wind it, that is not something the Landmarks Commission can require.
So maybe that's a good thing.
Just one point about this issue. Don People just reminded me that the condominium documents will require the maintenance of the clock.
So it's the applicant's intent to have this clock to be maintained as a working clock for the perpetuity of the condo until that's changed or something.
Right.
Well, just so everyone's clear, are we talking about the mechanism or the clock?
Not the mechanism, the clock.
The clock.
The clock.
The clock.
The mechanism will remain, the clock will remain, we're still investigating how to.
I understand that, but that's why I wanted to make sure that the record is clear. The proposal is not to keep the clock mechanism hand-wound over time.
Right, so you may have the mechanism standing there as an unused Hulk, and a
Correct.
nice little electric thing making it go around.
Correct.
Yeah.
But the intention is not to kind of allow it to become that guy's airy as a private
Oh,
space.
no, it will
It
be
is.
private space.
Oh, so he could store his suitcases up there.
Correct.
Okay. Last question, is there any space within the public realm, as you're redefining it, that might allow for the marble conference room to not be sawed off?
Not be what?
Shortened?
No.
Because of the floor-to-floor heights?
The reason it's there, and we look at every conceivable spot.
Even on the second floor where you have the grand double height, that the floor-to-floor there does not allow you to locate it there somewhere? You are creating a
Maybe
floor.
we should look at the second, in looking at the move, we felt it was, as long as we could move it reasonably, and we don't think loss of 1 foot 9 inches in what is a total of 14 feet destroys the room, was to make it more public.
I'm not disagreeing with you, I'm just asking the question, I mean, if there possibilities, I appreciate the care and the intent, and I think that it's a real improvement to the landmark's accessibility.
Yes.
I don't disagree with that one iota, I'm just asking, is there a way to have one's marble and enjoy it all and not lose a
What's the
foot and a half of it? The second floor, I'm sorry, the banking hall floor, right? Because you're putting it on the ground floor, I'm saying, I guess, the first floor. Or were you putting it on the first?
Actually, the same floor, the first floor.
We're putting
Oh,
it,
you're putting it over there, okay.
yeah, right here.
That's,
It's all continuous.
and that's just lower as a floor than the
By 1 foot
fourth
9
floor.
inches then
That
here.
floor.
And the fourth floor.
And the
really
floor
has
above.
one of the highest floor-to-ceiling heights in the building. so-
Wow. So there's no way to.
No.
All right.
And,
That answers the question.
okay.
Thank you.
Roberta?
Part of that question. So my question was, in terms of the configuration, the new configuration, is it the same or similar to the old one? Or when you reduced the height, I got that, but did you change the side? Did you get the entire conference room?
Oh, yeah, and the change in, I think is imperceptible. Let's go to that series. Everything about the plan, about the elevations, the doors, the glazing, the marble, the dimensions are exactly,
Okay,
precisely.
I was asking about.
There's no tampering with any of the fundamentals, it's just the ceiling height. And we didn't remove fabric just in one place. We took a lot of care to find the best place. So we did it in 3 or 4 different locations to make it as invisible as possible.
Okay, so then, but these two spaces are the only spaces, these two areas on this sheet, on this floor, are the only two that are public, right? So the
Yes.
So the others are within an apartment? Or
Yes,
something, right?
yes.
And just explain one more time how the stair works. So this drawing on 103 which shows the glass when you're looking.
103.
That's the first floor. So on every floor, do you see this stair?
On every, currently, there is a door on every floor.
So
We currently don't have permission to remove this wall and door, so we're planning on making it fire-rated glass.
But only
On the
first
floors
floor.
above, we must keep that wall. So it's only here where the historic view is so important, it's off the lobby, would be a wonder if we could do that. And our hope is that, and we'll report back to you on that. We made an application to DOB for that already.
My last question was just about visibility and the elevator that's really very prominent on
Yeah.
one of the
Why don't we go to the
sheets.
site
But I
lines?
mean, the middle part is also prominent, but some of those things that you say are minimally visible, it seems that they're so minimally visible that they could be not visible, but what can you do with your elevator? That's terrible.
So my word for minimum visibility pertains to the additions that relate to habitable space, the mechanical elements of the roof.
Very
In a few locations are more than minimally visible. We know that. The elevator, here it is.
Mechanical bulkheads.
Those are the things that really
Mechanical and
show.
elevator, here and
Right.
here. But keep in mind, this elevator shaft is there. There were elevators there. We don't happen to have a photograph of them, but we have the plans and
Is
we
there a
knew they were
bulkhead
there.
there too?
On 75.
Yeah, the bulkhead had to be there because the elevator was there.
Hey, on your sheet 75, really,
75, okay. This one, that's the same one.
yes, that's pretty.
Well, it is.
That's-
You're right. And I can't say it isn't. It is. And we have a machine room less elevator, so we have the minimum height, minimum overrun. It is, if we have an elevators there, we think that's the reason why we have them there, because they were there in the first place.
Right, so it can't be pushed back so that it's less visible from the...
Not really, because then you know what? You're in historic fabric.
Well, the historic fabric is where, I mean, is the elevator.
It's at the,
that
in the
used to
Leonard
be
Street
there,
lobby, I
right?
think.
That used to be there. There's nothing, you're saying it's not there now, right?
Right. We have it there because it was there. That's the principal reason. And to put it somewhere else,
Yes. Yes.
nearby would be in the Leonard Street lobby. It's right there. Well, maybe I should show you a proposed plan. You want to see a plan of that?
Can you show that 3D that you have with where it shows the garden and all the rooftop?
Bird's eye view?
Right. There's one.
Oh, there.
Yes, this one.
So
So what are
here's
we
the-
seeing?
let's-
Where's
let's
that tall
walk through
thing?
it.
Yes, okay.
That elevator right there.
That exists? No.
No, wait,
Yeah.
it's here.
See, is that an elevator? That's the elevator?
Which is the thing that we see in all this,
That's the one.
That's the
you
one?
say that That's the elevator bulkhead, and then there's a mechanical one to its right.
So,
That's-
this is the elevator that,
And so how many feet from the roof line is that?
it's probably a bay, 15 feet.
but its height is, takes you to above the 13th floor, to the 14th floor?
So this is 13, this is
Right.
14, and it has to be this,
And the
Far above.
overrun.
and we can show you all the documentation in terms of the elevator details and so forth. The only way to make it less visible would be to,
If you
would be
didn't,
to move it somewhere completely different.
well, isn't it possible if you didn't actually bring it to this floor, you wouldn't have to?
It's the only elevator that provides legal ADA access to the roof. We are stopping the elevator here for historic visibility reasons. We're stopping the elevator here because it would crash into the clock tower. This elevator has to go to this floor.
And this is for public, or who go, this is for?
In other words, this level is a required roof terrace for the use of the owners of the building,
All of the others.
all of the owners.
Okay, that's there.
Therefore requires ADA access.
All right.
And it's the only one that goes there because we can't take the others there. We're stopping these at a lower elevation because otherwise those elevators would be too high.
All right.
But this one being higher because it was there was more acceptable.
But your 13th floor, which you have right now, which you said actually becomes smaller because you're setting it back, is also becoming taller.
No.
Right.
The height of the 13th floor roof is already, the existing height is above zoning allowed, but we're allowed to replace what's there in kind.
So what is that height? Because it looks taller, that's all,
Than the existing?
than the existing.
No.
Okay.
The only thing that's taller are these 2 points, which fall within the 200-foot setback of the avenues for a 210-foot height. The existing 13th floor,
All right, so the entire 13th floor, even if it's visible from any angle, it's basically as visible today as it will be in the future. It's
less in the future because we're setting it back.
But the footprint is changing because it's coming out more in front than it was before.
Here,
Okay.
it's moving
It's
this
moving,
way.
but it's setting back on the
It's
side.
setting back all the way along.
Okay.
So the sightlines and the mock-up, we can go over that again, of the 13th floor are really minimally visible, as they are today, because it's no higher. What's visible today, or in this proposal, are this piece of the penthouse, here and here, this elevator, this cooling tower.
Okay. Are there other questions? Otherwise, I know there are a lot of people here to speak, so why don't we take testimony, and then may have more questions for you. Okay. Thank you, Jack. Okay, so Bruce Ehrman. Each person will be given 3 minutes.
It's my inaugural testimony before Commissioner Srinivasan, and I'm sorry it's rather lengthy. I'll try to keep it shorter than the presentation. This is one of the most difficult resolutions I've written in 13 years as co-chair of the Community Board Landmarks Committee. Whereas this is a complex application involving the alteration, renovation, addition to, and in some cases outright relocation of spaces in and on a glorious individual New York City landmark known as the Clock Tower Building, and whereas besides exterior designation, the 2-block-long structure is the only one in New York City to have at least 4, probably 6 actually, interior space designations, 3 of them on upper floors. And the monumental design by McKim, Mead, and White was called one of the most sumptuously fitted structures anywhere, according to historian Christopher Gray, quoting the 1897 New York Tribune, adding few of the old world places can compare with its richness and architectural fiber and interior finish. And whereas it must be noted that the reprivatization of this corner of New York City's treasured legacy and downtown Manhattan's pride is not the fault of the developer who purchased the property as a result of the prior city administration's deacquisitioning, and whereas it also must be noted on the one hand that the developer received this building presumably without contingency or previous closed-door landmarks side agreements, and on the other that 346 Broadway has been falling into decrepitude for years, and without the developer's current efforts, there is no telling to what depth of decay this structure might have sunk, and whereas the conversion proposal is drawn by buyer Blinder Bell, with its own distinguished history of preservationist architecture, and whereas the enormity of this application and the alteration scope is nevertheless daunting and distressing, and whereas this resolution is broken into exterior and interior segments, exterior, whereas the proposed removal of the Leonard Street fire escapes, which are of ornate wrought iron and were installed within 2 decades of the building's completion, is unacceptable, especially in conjunction with the rather cynical attempt to replace them with balconies, not even setback terraces, hanging off the side of the building in order to create thousands of additional sellable square feet, despite the building's pre-existing 420,000 interior square feet, and whereas those balconies would each be 6 feet by 15 feet and there would be 2 sections of 10 balconies, and whereas the proposed Leonard Street entrance elevation is sensitive and desirable, as is the marquee and lighting program, which will bring grace to a dark and foreboding street front, long shrouded under scaffolding, erected to prevent falling masonry from hitting pedestrians. And I'm reading as fast as I can. Whereas the parapet reconstruction and extensive exterior restorations are laudable, and much of the Catherine Lane and Lafayette Street ground floor infill improvements, including window and door penetrations, would be an improvement over existing conditions. And, the grand Broadway entrance facade...
I'm sorry, your time's up. Can we continue? We can?
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
And whereas the we did that. And whereas the grand Broadway entrance facade has suffered over time, the new plan would change from McKim, Mead, and White's 4 doors in pairs of 2 to 2 center doors with fixed side panels, and the window alignments and ornamentation above would be altered, and what can only be called inarticulate commercial doors surmounted by blank transoms and double-hung windows would be added the north and south ends, disturbing the original composition. And whereas worse, spite gates would be installed at the center entrance and closed after 7 p.m., which would likely be kept closed permanently at some point to keep passersby from enjoying the open entry arcade. And whereas all window frames would be replaced with aluminum sashes, which seems expedient but inappropriate in a building of this significance. And whereas an entirely new 13th floor would be constructed, highly visible from the south, along with pop-up penthouse extensions surrounded by gardens. And whereas the 13th floor and pop-up penthouses would be made almost entirely of sheer glass, and the assemblage looks somewhat as if a circa 1980s suburban corporate campus were plopped on top of the building. And whereas the entire Eastern Dome Pavilion would be restored beautifully, and whereas the clock tower itself would have additional windows added, which is not an issue, nor are the altered and widened rooftop balustrades, and whereas the long-removed huge globe finial above the clock tower would be reimagined, potentially welcome and potentially dangerous depending upon whose and what taste prevails, and whereas the loss of the clock tower bell gently ringing on the hour is mourned by the entire neighborhood. It has been sounding for a century and was made famous in the book Humans of New York, but one cannot expect the future owner of a 4-story penthouse incorporating the clock tower to give that back to the community. And whereas part of the landmark and development mandates, despite what was said here today, as I read it, are to keep the clock working. The clock needs to be wound manually every 2 weeks and has been maintained at least since the 1970s by the same clockmaster. And whereas testimony was given by a city preservationist official speaking as a private citizen, expressing concern over the lack of any credible plan for maintaining the clock, and indeed a representative of the developer said there are no plans yet to do so, although I appreciate Mr. Peoples' commitment tonight to keep it working. And whereas a directive must be put in place and enforced to keep the clock working. Now I'm going to the interior, and there's only 2 pages. Whereas the Leonard Street lobby restoration seems appropriate, although the community board could not review every detail. And whereas what can be said of the individually designated second floor offices that are to be turned into someone's bedroom? Although the entire history of the Landmarks Preservation Commission exists in the modern era, no one involved with designation could have contemplated socioeconomic changes, allowing this rare second floor interior landmark to become a bedroom. It is almost satirical to think of its occupant coming to the Landmarks Preservation Commission for permission to put up wallpaper or a curtain bar, or for LPC to send out inspectors on a regular basis to make certain that the space hasn't been redecorated in, say, the Scandinavian style. And whereas, as for the proposed removal of the designated 4th floor president's office to a 1st floor private conference room, if this space is to be amputated from its intended place within McKim, Mead, and White's scheme, then it should be incorporated into the main portion of the community space so that it may be enjoyed by the public, unlike all the other designated interior spaces, which will henceforth be off limits, including the beloved Clock Tower Gallery, the non-profit gallery founded by the legendary Alana Heiss, and which has been a Tribeca institution since the 1970s, and notwithstanding either technical difficulties or other controversies involving size and location of the community space. And by the way, that space has been open for most of the length of lifetime of most people down here since 1972. And whereas the relocation of one of the magnificent designated staircases to a more accessible location on the ground floor near the entrance to the banking hall commercial space makes it more available to the public. And whereas its restoration is magnificent, but the glass shawl being added to one side of it for safety reasons is joltingly out of context, as is the design of the adjoining elevator enclosure. And whereas the restoration of the breathtaking central wrought iron and stone central staircase is to be applauded, and whereas the proposed restoration and alteration of the designated Broadway corridor is quite beautiful, and whereas the community board questions whether or not the relocation of the elevators is compromising the community center space, which has been reduced in size by approximately 5,000 square feet since the initial proposal, and it is requested that
Mr. Ehrman, your testimony is fairly long. Can you?
I'll go to the therefore be it resolved.
Why don't you conclude?
Okay.
Okay.
Therefore be it resolved that the application is one of the most complicated landmarks applications Community Board has reviewed concerning the contemporary meaning of landmarks designation and usage. Be it further resolved that it needs to be reiterated that there is much to admire in this proposal, not least of which is the developer's intent to bring back some glory to a crumbling monument. And be it further resolved that a tremendous amount of this proposal needs to be reconsidered and is too complex to simply approve or reject. Therefore, be it further resolved that CB1 recommends that the Landmark Preservation Commission consider the entirety of this resolution when ruling on the application. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Barbara Zay. Please limit yourselves to 3 minutes, and if you have testimony that goes on, you can just submit that in writing to us. But 3 minutes, the time will go off.
Barbara Zay, the Historic Districts Council. HDC thanks the Commission for the opportunity to testify regarding the residential conversion of 346 Broadway. In reviewing the drawings for this proposal, our committee noted the applicant's analytical methodology of determining a, quote, hierarchy of significance for the building's designated interiors. HDC feels that this subjective analysis should not have any bearing on the legal validity of the Commission's designations. The protected interiors of 346 Broadway are a rare window into a New York City that is long past. Many buildings of this vintage survive, some of them are even landmarks, but few fully intact interiors of the late 19th century exist. 346 Broadway is one of these lucky few. One of the building's protected interior spaces is the clock tower, home to one of the only mechanical clocks in the city. While it seems that there are no plans to remove the four-faced clock as part of this proposal, the clock's function will effectively cease with the privatization of the tower space, making it simply a relic, as opposed to a purposeful mechanism for public benefit and enjoyment. The loss of the clock's function is problematic, but not nearly as disturbing as the effective de-designation of one of our 117 interior landmarks, which the Landmarks Law defines as, quote, customarily open or accessible to the public, or to which the public is customarily invited. Surely this monumental building provides enough space in which to make a sizable profit off of New York City's robust residential market. Must our interior landmarks become victims of such schemes? Further, the exclusive private use of an interior landmark challenges the authority of the Landmarks Preservation Commission to protect our city's historic built environment. Our committee was generally pleased with the design of the exterior and appreciates the extensive restoration work proposed. However, we would prefer that the rooftop additions on the eastern end of the building be pulled down to decrease their visibility. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Belga?
Krista Belgoff for the Society for the Architecture of the City. If the sale of 346 Broadway had received a fresh ULURP review, I could have been at the scoping session asking why there was no easement proposed to guarantee continuing public access to the designated interior landmark spaces, especially to the clock tower and the clock mechanism so that the clock could continue to be serviced. I would have asked for clarification of the rights of the new private owner with respect to alteration. Does designation protect the originally adopted landmark site and its configuration? Can protected interior features be stripped and moved to other non-designated areas? If so, what remains protected? And how? Is the original site still a landmark site? Is the stripped-off decoration still landmarked? What is the landmark status of the decoration's new location, protected or not protected? How does an applicant have the authority to decide with colored maps and charts whether some interior landmark features are of secondary importance? If a city-owned interior landmark is sold for private condominium development, does the privatization of a designated space like the clock tower trump public access? By the definition in the law, the space must be customarily open. In my view, the law is silent on the matters that were mentioned by counsel. Is this not a de facto de-designation? And if so, should there not be a rescission of the designation subject to council and mayoral approval rather than a simple certificate of appropriateness decision? Do the commissioners have the discretionary power to approve permanent loss of public access to a beloved interior landmark using a certificate of appropriateness? This is not business as usual. This is a unique happening. Rescissions in the past have followed hardship applications or catastrophic fires. Does anyone seriously contend that the conversion of this building would not allow a sufficient return on investment if the clock tower suite retained its non-residential status or had the protection of an easement allowing access? I mentioned a fresh ULURP review. According to a memorandum of law in a separate but related action, Richard Emery's firm found that the city had incorrectly relied on a previous 1998 environmental review.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've submitted the rest. We hope this can be resolved by negotiation. Thank you.
Thank you. Andrea Goldman?
Good evening, Chair Srinivasan and Commissioners. I'm Andrea Goldwyn, speaking on behalf of the New York Landmarks Conservancy. The Conservancy supports the overall plan to adopt this building for residential use. Restoration of the deteriorated masonry facade and repair of wood windows will be a significant improvement. Installation of shallow balconies at locations where the fire escape is now attached will not detract. The reconstructed 13th floor and penthouses are set back, not easily seen, and we look forward to reviewing interpretations of the lost historic globe. One note, the building is mostly surrounded by narrow downtown streets, so the Broadway entrance is one of the most visible elements at sidewalk level. We believe it would be diminished by installation of the proposed gate. The most challenging aspect, of course, is treatment of the designated interiors. Restoration of the lobby, banking hall, and exit stair appears appropriate. Restoration and relocation of the second floor staircase and fourth floor outer chamber will improve those spaces and allow the public some access which would otherwise be completely curtailed. Rehabilitation of offices with designated features on the second and fourth floor will protect those features. Among the city's 117 interior landmarks, the level of public access varies. It's changed in some places since designation, but many are lobbies of commercial or civic buildings, theaters, a few restaurants. Up until now, none have been converted to private residential use. This proposal will dramatically reduce and in some cases end public access to designated features, including the clock tower, while the clock itself is still visible to the public. In keeping with the spirit of the designation, the LPC should establish a monitoring plan that runs with the property containing the clock, requiring that it be maintained and continues to operate. Thank you.
Thank you. Rick Bell? I'm sorry? Oh, Rick had to leave? Okay. We have a letter of support. Okay. Okay. Oh, yes, I have the letter. All right. Okay, sir. Okay. Lynn Ellsworth?
I'm Lynn Ellsworth with the Tribeca Trust. Privatization of public assets like this is always very contentious. I think as an economist, I witnessed a problem with that in the Soviet Union, and I think here in our country it requires new law and new judicial considerations. That said, the Tribeca Trust supports the adaptive reuse of this building into condos, and we're happy the building is getting the attention it deserves. That said, we have a few comments. One is that the penthouse on the 13th floor should be reconsidered so that it does not appear as something that is not a natural outgrowth of the building. Second, we asked the LPC to view critically and with extreme thoughtfulness any design elements that inhibit public access to the interior landmarks. Restricting access to these interiors, in our view, constitutes a taking of the public commons, an erosion of the public good. We also feel that the community facility concept could be rethought. Leasing to a private nonprofit does not a community facility make. We actually think that the clock tower room would make a great community lecture hall. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, sorry. Next speaker, Jeremy Woodruff.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Jeremy Woodruff. Because I was speaking at the front of the room for the last proposal, I just want to make clear that for this one, I'm speaking strictly for myself. I'm speaking today to express my concern about the fate of the interior designations of 346 Broadway, and most especially the designations related to the tower clock. There is much to appreciate in the overall proposal for this building, which has been severely neglected for decades and desperately needs an infusion of resources. But the proposals for many of the interior spaces, and especially the clock tower rooms, are extremely problematic. The interior designations related to the clock tower are different from other interior designations and possibly unique in the city. They are not based on elaborate or unusual architectural ornament or on particularly grand or gracious spaces or on significant historical activities and events. Rather, they reflect a conscious effort on the part of the Commission to protect as a public amenity an ensemble of spaces and features related to a technological achievement and the public manifestation of that achievement via the 4 dials on the clock tower. This point is made clear by the designation report's careful delineation of the spaces, the interior fittings and components of the clock mechanism, including its need for regular maintenance, and the ensemble's relationship to the public time-telling function of the clock tower, itself expressive of the institutional power of the New York Life Insurance Company. The current proposal, which would leave the clock mechanism hidden, privatized, not working, and at risk, is not appropriate. Neither would be its alteration or moving. Either of these outcomes would be a great loss to the understanding of 19th century American horological advances and refinements, and would destroy the historic relationship between the mechanism, clock tower, and public time-telling function, so carefully encompassed by the designation. The Commission should require that other alternatives be devised for consideration. The question of the status of the clock tower rooms and other interior landmark spaces, if they become private spaces not open to the public, is a serious one. It merits open and vigorous discussion. Any decisions made here will have far-reaching implications for other interior landmarks. It seems impossible to imagine that the landmarks law would allow an owner of a designated interior landmark to simply close it to the public and make it a private space, thereby either requiring de-designation, as a space would no longer meet the definition of an interior landmark, or effectively resulting in a de facto de-designation. This proposal, therefore, in my view, is not simply a matter for appropriateness review. It amounts to an assault on the landmarks law itself. In conclusion, the Commission should deny that portion of the proposal that is related to the clock tower rooms and related components of the interior landmark designation. The applicant should return with a plan that provides for regular maintenance of the clock mechanism, protects public access to it, and
I'm sorry, your time is up.
Designated spaces, and retains the historic relationship of the clock mechanism and its time-telling function. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Woodruff. Marvin Schneider.
I've been involved in the restoration and maintenance of the tower clock at 346 Broadway for the past 35 years. And I'm here today out of concern that the efforts of Mr. Eric Reiner, the late George Whaley, Forrest Markowitz, myself, and others to preserve this unique mechanical clock for the benefit of posterity may be undone. despite the existence of a landmarks law and this venerable commission. Apparently, the proposal of the property owner to create a private residence in the tower does not take maintaining the clock machinery in working order into account. Neither has public access been addressed at all. The 1987 designation called for protection of the clock spaces and the machinery. Clearly, the intent was to have the clock machinery working and serving as an example of American horological workmanship in its original space, performing the function for which it was manufactured. The present plan for this location subverts this purpose. Representatives of the new owner visited the tower on several occasions, during which the relationship of the tower and machinery was demonstrated and explained in great detail. It is impossible for them not to have understood the significance of this unique designation and the logic behind it, and the fact that it is mechanical and hand-wound. Therefore, prior to acquisition, they understood precisely what they were getting. For them to develop a plan which obviates, sidelines, or ignores the unity of the clock and the tower is a naked assault upon the meaning of designation. Certainly, a plan which calls for the needs of the owner and the coexistence of the clock could and should have been developed and can yet be developed. The current plan may possibly include the disconnecting of the machinery and yet the appearance of a running clock. But in actuality, this would be a merely virtual preservation, not the real thing. I have always thought that landmark designation denotes preservation, not make-believe. Therefore, I respectfully urge this commission not to accept the owner's proposal for the clock and tower spaces as is presently submitted. Thank you for your time and for your kind attention.
Thank you. Forrest Markowitz.
Hi, I am Marvin's clock assistant, the saucer's apprentice, I suppose. I've been involved with the maintenance of 346 since 1992. When you find a lot of people in my hobby and business, you find that many of them also tinker with old cars. And Marvin has a nice 1948 Dodge, right out of the film noir movie. And it has a motor in it. It's called a Flathead 6. And if any of you, it was the precursor of the Slant 6, which Chrysler used in the 1960s. So if you had a Dodge, Dart, or a Valiant, this was essentially a very similar motor. Now, I go to a lot of these shows, and you look at motors, and they're pretty neat, but you would never go to a show to look at a motor which was taken out from under the hood, because the motor and the car are one and the same. Now, I suppose Marvin could do that to his car. It would not make much sense. He could also, let's say, electrify it and say, I'm going to take my motor out and I'm going to put in something else. And if you put in an electric motor, he would now have a Chevy Volt and not a 1948 Dodge. He could also decide, I'm not going to run this car anymore. I'm just going to have it sit, and it's not going to run. So what would he have then? Well, then he would have maybe not so much a 1948 Dodge, but 3,200 pounds of steel doing absolutely nothing. And that is my fear that will happen to this clock. It will be protected, you can look at the dial, you can wave to it, but it won't run. Well, what's the purpose then? Thank you.
Thank you. Chris DeSantis. Excuse me.
Good evening. I have 3 minutes to speak, and I know everybody's looking at their cell phones and the watches to see what time to get out here. It seems ironic that time seems to be so important, but a clock that provided the time for people for over 100 years wants to be done away with by certain people in this room, and we know that's what's going to happen. I'm the author of Clocks from New York. I spent many years researching the clocks here in New York. During the time I researched it, I saw that there's been many clock towers that have been converted over to penthouses, apartment buildings. Of course, they're on the top of buildings, they're in the top spaces, so they provide the best views, sweeping views, so they get the most money, right? We know the clock tower building in Dumbo sold highest real estate value in Brooklyn. No other real estate in Brooklyn has ever sold for that much. We're talking about a different type of situation here, a landmark clock. So there's specific rules here. Before we talk about that, before I go into that, I'd just like to mention quickly, it's similar to the Merchant House situation in which a lot was just recently approved so a developer can put up a hotel, and subsequently they found out that the engineers and the architects found out that any hotel that goes up near that Merchant House might destroy the structural integrity of that house. There's another situation in 1981. The Biltmore Hotel had a famous clock in it that everybody in New York knew about. Meet me under the Biltmore clock. What is it saying? I'm sure there are people in this room who are familiar with that. Unfortunately, that building, before it could be landmarked, Milstein Properties bought it, did what they want with the building. Even though the buildings to the sides of it were landmarked, it was an oversight by many people in the city at the time. But Milstein made it, they said, okay, well, what we'll do for you is we'll take that famous clock and we'll put it in the lobby of the building. They did that. Actually, I'm not even sure it is the same clock, but nobody cares about the clock anymore. We went from the most famous clock, and one of the most famous clock in New York, most famous clock in America, maybe the world, to nothing. Nobody cares about that clock anymore. If the developers, and they clearly were very ambiguous about what they plan to do with it, except they're not going to allow that mechanism to continue to run, whether it's electric or hand wound, they're not going to let it run. It's going to waste away, and it's going to turn into another Biltmore clock, and we're going to lose a great part of New York City history, a great part of American history, and a wonderful site for New Yorkers to see. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any more speakers on this item? Any more speakers? Do you want to speak on this item? Yes, please come forward.
Hi, my name is Eileen Herman, and I've lived in this neighborhood since 1979. I live at 366 Broadway, which is a block and a half away from 346. The first year that I was living here, the clock was repaired and in function. It just pleased the whole building, including myself. And it's devastating to me to think that I will no longer hear the chimes and no longer read the clock. That's all I want to say. I'm so happy that other people felt similarly.
Thank you. Are there any more speakers on this item? Yes. State your name for the record.
Yes. My name is Preston Pesic. I'm actually a private developer myself. This is my first time at an LPC meeting. I wanted to familiarize myself with the process. This particular case is very interesting to me. Number one, because I think it highlights potentially a problem with the overall procedure of submitting an application so complex as this one, which was articulated by this gentleman here, whose name I forget. But I don't know if there's an ability to take apart this proposal in almost kind of a line item veto type situation where you can say this works, this doesn't work, this works, this doesn't work. That's just a general comment about the process. If that ability doesn't exist within the LPC's powers, I would highly recommend that that process be enabled. A second part of this, I think that personally, I'm a resident of New York for only 10 years, so I wouldn't consider myself a long-time New Yorker. However, I'm very sensitive to the sonic environment, the audible built environment, and I believe that any component of the built environment that generates sound that contributes either positively or negatively to the overall ambiance, whether we are aware of it consciously or subconsciously, is incredibly important to the city itself, to its residents, and the overall health and well-being of our citizens. I would have everyone who's thinking about this issue strongly consider the value of the contribution that a clock tower like this might make to the auditory built environment. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any more speakers on this item? All right, I just want to note that the AIA New York chapter did submit a letter, and because that wasn't clear last time, they do register their strong support for this proposal. All right, so if there are no other speakers, yes, would you like to respond to some of the issues that have come up? And we can ask, I'm sure the commission has some questions. I guess one, well, I'm just going to ask you a question. And yes.
I do have a response.
Okay, all right, go ahead. You don't think you have a response? All right. Okay. All right, well.
The initial presentation said our position. I don't think anything that was said requires us to respond.
Oh, all right, so I think we may have some questions. Yes, Valerie, if you want to come up and.
Sorry. The idea that what the commission decides in the case of these upper level rooms as a precedent, I think is not correct, because these are very unique spaces. Even when they were designated, it's questionable how public they were. So we don't think that that would be a precedent for any other interior.
You mean the idea of privatizing these spaces?
Well, there was testimony that allowing the changes to these spaces that are in fact required for their apartments would become a precedent, and we don't think that's the case.
All right, yeah, yes.
Actually, as a developer, I want to say something. By the way, there was comments about we should have had access to the clock tower. I want to be clear that the clock tower mechanism is not publicly accessible. And in fact, it took me almost 5 attempts to get access to it myself. In fact, I didn't get access to it until I actually signed a contract to buy the building, because it's locked, it's held in with lock and key, so it has not been accessible. But also, maybe we haven't been clear. I've spoken to several of the people here who've testified. We are committed as a developer to preserve the operational mechanisms. And how we go about that, we're going to work with your staff. Jack's going to do that, but we are not looking to destroy it. We're not looking to put it in a basement. We're not looking to let someone store their luggage in it. You know, we plan to preserve it, and we plan to deal with this, and part of that with the condominium documents, so that we're looking at, our lawyers are evaluating the option of making the clock mechanism a common element that is maintained and paid for by the association itself, so that it will be able to have access to that. Now, we have done this in other projects of ours, in other developments, where spaces, even such as pools, that are accessible only to the owner of that particular unit, those are maintained by the association, because should they leak, crack, or something happen, it causes damage to the entire structure. So we're comfortable, and we plan to make sure that we have a firm and detailed mechanism and process for preserving and overseeing it. And that's not because it's an issue or can be an issue. It's how we would approach it and how we're planning to approach it anyway. So that is our focus on that.
I do have one question, and I think it's something that Commissioner Shamir has sort of raised, which is about the clock tower space and the space above where you have the mechanism. It's a very constrained space, because the clock mechanism is going to remain there, and you have the clock faces. And the space below that, which I think at the 13th floor level, the space actually doesn't have much features in it. It just seems to have the spiral staircase that takes you up, but it has very limited glazing around it. And these two spaces are connected to, I think, a duplex below, so it's now a quadruplex or something, right? I'm just wondering whether there isn't, on your part as a developer, to provide this space to be, I would say public, but at least accessible to the residents of the building, because they seem constrained as apartment spaces. They just don't seem like they lend themselves as a private apartment. And I'd say that's a little bit different from the spaces on the 2nd and 4th floor. So I'm just wondering, because it's square footage that you basically cannot use, especially the topmost floor. And you don't really have views because you're looking through the clock, I think. So it seems that it's something that would actually be an amenity for the building residents and give value to the units because they have this very unusual space that nobody can go to, as opposed to privatizing it as a unit. Also, I think for us and Mark had mentioned, what is our jurisdiction over these spaces. At the very minimum, it is that if there's anything happening within that space, we should have the ability to regulate that and also in some ways be able to monitor that. And I don't know if that necessarily lends itself for being privatized. So I think in the larger scheme of all that you're doing over here, and I think this project it's a wonderful project. And I think it's terrific in terms of what it does for preservation overall of just a magnificent building. But I think it's a small thing that you should think about reconsidering, which may actually be a very practical solution. So I'd like you to think about that. You're asking us for not only the conversion of this space, but also the addition of penthouses at the top. And I think in that context, which some of us have already raised concerns about its visibility. So this, I think, would be an interesting way of addressing, I guess, the overall package of preservation and restoration by giving up some of these spaces for something which is more public.
You made some good points, but there is a couple of things that make it not feasible. First of all, let's remember, this clock tower mechanism has never been a publicly accessible space. Who would go up in the decades of this building's life to go up and look at the mechanisms other than either the clock operator or...
No, people from the... if the people from the public can please... You're not a part of the debate, so I'm sorry you cannot speak. Thank you for telling us, but no more interjections from the public. Yes, Roberta?
I don't think it's so much a question of having access to the mechanism. I don't think it's so much a question of having access to the mechanism as it is that the mechanism be serviced or maintained so that the clock works. So I don't think it's about the public being able to get to it. But
well, I think they've already agreed that...
I think the space, but I think that I agree with
I just think it's a very
saying.
Constrained space,
Yes,
and it
I
seems
agree.
like it's something that could easily be, I don't know how many people will go up there, but when you have a whole package of things that are being looked at, this is something that we may feel has some utility and benefit for being more public. I think
do
the
agree.
idea of the clock working and how it works, I think it's very hard for us to force them to do the manual wind-up. And I think they are agreed to make, well, they've offered to do it in some form or manner, but we don't know if it's going to be manual, digital, or some other electronic way of doing it. But the idea is that you'd keep the clock running, and that's what they've agreed to, even though... I'm sorry, so... Yes, I guess I've made my point on this issue.
But just say, I just think that what you did propose or suggest in terms of semi-private or whatever, something more than what they're originally offered, is, I think, another way of looking at it, so that maybe the public is at least people in the building or people who they invite. Let's say that they use that space for, some gathering or some, festival.
Right, exactly.
Then so it's not like completely
Does that get us into
isolated.
regulating use? I mean, I thought we're not allowed.
I don't know if it's about it's just about, I agree, I don't want to start sort of murking around in that area, but I think it's a space, it seems like it's a space that you can think of. We're looking at a sort of, they've made the argument to us that there's a hierarchy of spaces, right? And in terms of primary in the interiors and the secondary. And in that approach, they've done incredibly great things. I think, the restoration of the banking room looks beautiful over here. I've been within the building. If you go into that banking room now, it looks like it's from a clip from the movie Brazil. I mean, it's terrible. And so some of the things they're doing are so amazing for one of the most beautiful buildings in Lower Manhattan. But they've asked us to look at this entire proposal in the context of primary and secondary, and the primary ones are going to remain public, and it's a layer that they've applied here, and in that context, I'm looking at the clock tower because it's, if nothing else, is more unusual. So it's not necessarily regulating the use, but to think about it in the context of primary and secondary, because it's such a novel area as opposed to the offices, for example. It's something for you to look at and maybe respond back. Yes.
Yeah, we would explore it. I have one question.
Yes.
Is it the focus of the mechanism being viewable? Because the concern here, as you pointed out, is the tight space. I'm not sure that the building code would allow it to be considered a public space, because as opposed to within a home, because again, you're going to have egress and ingress access issues, ADA issues, which it does not comply with. There's no way to get an elevator there or a lift there. So the concern is, we'll look at it and explore it, but it is not conducive. And in fact, it is almost unsafe, as you know, to be up there because it's tight. And then there's as you may recall, there's a little midway up, there's a small kind of balcony, if you will, around it, which would be, again, unsafe.
Well, I think,
okay. We'll explore it.
Why don't you explore that? Because you're right. If there are real constraints about making this some kind of public, semi-public space, which, in fact, if you have to make it public, you have to intervene into the historic nature of the building, which is you have to start cutting up walls and putting other things, then I think that's a response we'd like to hear. All right, yes, Michael.
Since we already have 2 fists into the tar baby here, if I might, I have to express a certain amount of unease at that specific designation of already designated interior spaces into primary and secondary. And what I would posit is the architects, as the servant of the developer, are tasked with coming up with some sort of mechanism by which they can say, okay, these we don't really have to care about. And that mechanism becomes very troublesome for me unless I've seen those spaces or the other people at this table.
But one thing I would say is that even if it's a situation, I only use that because that was an argument they put forward. But let's say as a commission, we decide that there is no difference between any of these spaces, they should be treated equally. The question then for us is that what is appropriate in this context of an adaptive reuse? So some of the spaces, the lobby space, the ones that they've called primary and we say is interior, is about its restoration. They are cluttered, and this is the opportunity to bring them back to something that they were historically. That's a very positive thing. If you look at the spaces that they've considered secondary, and we consider interior, is the spaces that are within the units on the 2nd floor and the units on the 4th floor, except for that space that's being relocated. And
Right. 2nd floor is chopped up.
We're being asked to agree with that without having the opportunity to view either images of those spaces or the actual.
Oh, they're here.
Well, the images right.
Not great.
I think that, I'm sure that the applicants, if there are commissioners here who want to take a site visit, I think that can be easily arranged before we have our next hearing, if the commissioners would like to do that.
Can I
Yes.
ask a legal question that, based on what Ms. Goff's testimony was? What does happen? Let's say we permit the relocation of the marble room or the stair. Does the site of the landmark relocate?
Technically speaking, the site would not relocate. The
regulation of the moved materials would be subject to a restrictive deck or some other legal mechanism to give us review over that. But the landmark site, it would have to require sort of a modification of the designated space.
Isn't that implicit in what they're asking us to do, is to re-landmark the building in such a way that this piece is here, and that piece is there, and that piece is...
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's important to remember the commission, I think going back to this notion of primary and secondary space, I think that was their sort of framework for talking about it, but I think we do it all the time. And the interior here, this is not a designated interiors. Okay, the landmark, this is a designation of an interior. That is what this is. It is a sum total of different interiors. And I think that in that context, it is important to look at, if one is making changes, where would one make them in a way that has the least or possible impact. So for example, on an exterior landmark recently, with the individual landmark we just looked at, we were looking at modifications of the exterior envelope, some of which, if they were occurring in the primary facade, one would argue is very significant, but the fact they were occurring on a fully designed and 4-on-4 facades individual landmark, on the side yard, in the back, not very visible, we looked at that and we said, in that case, that's the place to make these changes. Maybe we had some issues with whether they had to be here or there, but that was what the analysis was. And I think that the applicant's approach here is consistent with that analysis, and that we should look at this as a designated interior that represents a building's design.
So with that argument in mind,
yeah.
If you relocate the stair and the marble room, for example, you're comfortable that those spaces in their new locations and their new configurations would still be protected by the landmarks procedures, and that the spaces from which they were vacated would no longer be subject to regulation?
This would be something that we would be working out. That mechanism, just as we're talking about trying to deal with access. Okay, it's the same mechanism that we would be working with the
the format would be a restrictive deck.
That's right, to find something that is
that would
satisfactory.
carry with multiple owners down into history.
That's right. Good. Thanks.
Yes, Michael.
Would you address that issue that came up about this being, in fact, a de facto de-designation? Because that's something that also makes me uncomfortable.
Well, I think it's one of the uncomfortable facts of the landmarks law that it does not require continued access to interiors. And I think that, is that a reason the law should be changed?
There's an issue of de-designation here that...
well, if you're saying, if by de-designation you are they are using the term de-designation in two respects. One is the privatization is in essence a de-designation, which I believe is factually and legally incorrect. Okay? The question of whether moving the space is in fact a de-designation, that is more akin to a de-designation, though I say, for example, we have done this in the past. Bank interiors. We take significant features of bank interiors and remove them, and they're stored elsewhere, or sometimes they are put elsewhere, okay? Without redesignating the space. So I think interiors really present significant issues of adaptive reuse for the Commission that are constantly being struggled with. And I think, we have never been asked to remove an entire room of a designated space. So that's new, right?
What makes me mildly nervous is that Valerie mentioned that they don't view this as a precedent. You just mentioned that it is a precedent.
Well, I think that it's the first time it's been done. It's also, like has been said, this is a very unusual designation. This occurred with a city-owned building, the landmarks review of which, by the way, was advisory. Okay, so when we designated this in 1987, they could do whatever they wanted. And under Section 318 of the Landmarks Law, their requirements were they came to us, we reviewed it, we issued a report, not even a certificate of appropriateness, not a permit for minor work, not a certificate of no effect, and they could do what they wanted. And that law reflected the fact that different agencies have different mandates, and that preservation doesn't trump any one of those mandates. That's the lay of the law as it was drafted. So I think that, yes, in the context, would It's why I think we have not designated, with the exception of the Rainbow Room, any other upper floor interior spaces where this is a possibility. All the other designated spaces are primarily either they're lobbies, they are restaurants, they are theaters, okay? And I think it makes sense.
All right. Other comments or questions or concerns, responses that you'd like them to come back and think about?
It continues Michael's question about the outer chamber room that's moving from 4 to 2 and from 4 to 1, and is not, in my mind, maybe as significant as the clock tower issue, but is a real alteration, a true change to the volume of the room. That I know you've made every effort to take off in bits and pieces, in bits, so that it doesn't, you're not removing an entire calf. You're taking off a few inches from all parts of the body. But I think in this case, the volume, which approximates a kind of cubic proportions, is really squished and made considerably lower horizontal feeling. And I would wonder if there's any way that it can move, if it's moved, in fact, and if all of that's resolved, to somewhere else on the 4th floor where the height is the same as where it is now.
Yes, you'd like to respond? Go ahead.
We certainly looked at that, because that would be obvious. There's two issues. One, the column spacing doesn't lend itself in that area. But more importantly, it would be far less publicly accessible. It would be in an apartment.
Yeah, yes, it would.
So that could be done.
Mm-hmm. Right, and that's, I guess that's
if we could find a way to get the columns to work, because the bay system there is not, because it's at the end of the building, and I can show you drawings that we did of that. But if the commission feels that moving that space to a private apartment is more appropriate, I don't want to make a commitment for the owners, but it's possible that we could do that.
Can I ask a question in the same vein? Just a question. Could you blow the ceiling out and have a step up on your 15 foot 11 high second floor that would allow you to keep the height?
Well, what that would do would be to destroy the apartment above.
It's only, we're talking about 1'9", so you'd go from a 14 foot high ceiling to a 12 foot high ceiling. I'd say that's pretty good. I think that there's possibilities that one could explore, is what I'm saying. Right.
I'm not so concerned about, and maybe it's because I've had the benefit of seeing the space, and I would encourage all of you to go there, that this is, as Mark said, a very, very unusual interior landmark. I don't know if the Commission today would landmark these spaces, truly. The marble, it is very beautiful. But I think the proportions are not, I don't know if it'll be discernible. I think it's more important that space versus some of these other spaces that, we saw photographs that are becoming apartments. Those are actually, in my mind, at least fairly simple spaces. They're not grand. This one is more grand because of this marble in the wood and its symmetry. I think the loss of, it's probably a 1.5 feet. But the gain of this being in an area which is much more public is a very positive thing. And I think that their approach to the design has been very meticulous. And if you look at the pictures, the reality is nobody goes into that space right now. Really, nobody sees it. None of us, hardly anybody's seen it. So it's almost in this entire approach to revitalizing, adapting this building, they're actually bringing a lot of these spaces back which have disappeared. And I think that's a very positive thing. So I feel that it is a bit of a give to make the height shorter. But I think there's much bigger benefit in the relocation as they propose now than the possibility of having exactly the same volume, but then making it into a living room for someone on the 4th floor where you have the ceiling. Because it'd be hard, I think, to make the area above the, I guess, whatever the 2nd floor, where all the apartments are, to suddenly include a more public space like a conference room on that floor.
I have a
Yes,
question. Exactly where is the mechanism that we're talking about? Is it right under the clock mechanism?
But
Is it
it's
in the clock.
It's in the clock, and you access it from under.
Yeah, we can show you.
You access it
See that?
from.
It's in that upper skinnier room.
There you go, right there.
And so how do you, so you have to come through that, you have to go up that stair to the top to get the.
Tell her the dimensions of the.
No, I'm just wanting to understand. I was thinking that maybe the mechanism was not there, but somewhere else. So it's the same space.
And as you tell, the space kind of shrinks as you go.
Yeah, okay.
Well, we have the experts. Can
Right.
tell
No,
you
that's all I just wanted to know.
everything
where
about it. It is
in the
totally
space.
a space devoted to the operation and maintenance of the clock.
So
With
it's
all
the
kinds
upper
of
level.
gear, and you can hardly get around it, but it's very, it's very functional in what it is, but it's, as Don Peebles said, it is not a place that the general public goes to on a regular basis, ever, nor would I think they would that. But that doesn't mean they won't, but it's illegal in terms of ADA access. So the space of the mechanism is, there it is. Oh, we got 2 points.
And it's a very small area, walkway area around it. It's meant to be a service kind of corridor around the mechanism for the winder to do it. But
it's not that it isn't a fabulous space or an
No, I'm just saying, so this is where a person would go to maintain the clock, so they'd have to travel up there. But that space that you're showing with those folks
To me,
standing
the most
around
important
is
thing below is the
an
clock.
accessible
It's
space,
keeping
right?
the clock, not public people watching, going up there and looking at it.
Yeah,
It's
no, that's
seeing
fine.
it in its scenographic sense as an urban remnant of the 19th century when there were clocks. That
But
was the only way of measuring time.
The clock is enabled, to make it digital changes, it's not a preservation of the clock. It's a
right,
digital
and
clock.
it's an interesting thing because it's, and I don't know if Mark, if you want to talk to about it, because it's, if you read the report, it doesn't, at least, I don't know if it's clear that it's intent, it's almost like it's a feature. The mechanism is a feature. The clock is really, it's the clock mechanism, and then otherwise the clock faces and everything else is a part of the building form. So it's very hard to kind of.
But the public sees the clock, it's the only public access.
The public sees
to this building.
the public sees the clock outside, and it's external. That's where you see the clock, and the way it functions is very different. And then you have the structure itself. I don't know what to call it. The mechanism.
Works.
But I don't think there's any guidance that says that. I mean, I don't know, Mark, if there is, that requires or even allows us to sort of feel that its feature is based on the way it's being used.
For example, Commissioners, if the clock stopped working, well, could be wrong, the Commission could not issue a violation to say this clock must continue to work.
But if it's made digital, it's a replacement.
No, I think that there's confusion. No one's talking about taking the clock faces out and turning them into digital
That's
clocks.
what,
The
and
clock
nobody's-
faces will remain. The question is, what is turning the hands of the clock? Is it the hand-wound mechanism, the historic mechanism that exists in the picture on the top left, or is it some other electrified version, a motor of that? And I think that's the question. And there's, as I understand the application, there's no proposal to remove the clock works, which you see on the upper left in its case. But the question is, will that in fact mechanically move the hands of the clock? That's the open question that the applicants have not resolved as far as I understand it.
And this level where people are shown, is this the part
That's below it.
This is below.
That's the room below
This
it.
is on the floor of the,
Right, but also one of the designated spaces.
It's on the roof level.
That's a space
Upper
that we're
roof level.
suggesting the residents have access to.
yes.
Right, that was because just showing it, I mean, the shot of it as an apartment just didn't look like much of an apartment.
And if you can go back to that
But
other.
I understand that
Go back
when
to the other
it's,
view.
if it's public space, there are implications on its egress and access to it. It may prove to be challenging, so you're going to look at
Right.
it.
And the other thing, just so you understand, if you can see in the upper left-hand corner, at the top of that picture is a pole that goes out. That's what turns, that's what's turning the hands of the clock. So there's 4 of those dividing up the space, right? So it's not a space that people go to, have a drink. Okay.
And I want to just add one small point here, is that machines don't last forever. And the parts, like old cars, the challenge is finding replacement parts. And they're not companies that are actively engaged in building new mechanical clocks. And so at some point, it may stop working. And we're, and so I think that's an issue as well to just to consider. It's our goal to keep it operational.
That's true, and it's hard to require someone to hire somebody to keep the clock running. It's a very complicated thing, and it seems it truly does feel like it's a... I understand, but I'm talking about the Landmarks Preservation Commission's jurisdiction to require that is very hard. Because even if, let's say, we have an interior of a theater, we can't require that interior to remain open. It'll be dark and closed, and there's nothing you can do about it. And in fact, many of the theaters, and in fact, theaters have also been relocated, but I'm not sure those were landmark theaters, but I think there's no ability for us to do that. And it's really not within our jurisdiction. Michael, you were going to say something.
Are we having our general discussion now, or are we blending into that?
We're having our general discussion.
So, I think that there's many things about this application, as everyone has noted, that are really, really good. And I think that one shouldn't lose the forest for those trees. It's a great application, and I think that the repurposing the building is unquestionably great. Some of the details I wanted to bring up as suggestions that the applicant consider throughout the building, apart from the hot button clock. I think that the elevator lounge, or what used to be the elevator lounge, by stripping it of the doors, I think and having it to be kind of an undifferentiated space, it loses its definition as an apse as it was intended. I think that could be easily retained if one kept the doors or replicated the old doors, even if they were kept in the open position, somehow to define the space as it was previously defined by the surface of the doors, for which there are great drawings. I think the issue of the bulkhead, I think that the differentiation between the two styles of bulkhead can be maintained by altering the design of the two styles of bulkhead, even while allowing for greater visibility through those parapets to facilitate the rooftop use. So I think that while the applicant has chosen one style as a basis for their replication, I'm sure that they could come up with a second version that would offer more visibility to the top floor unit owners, while at the same time perpetuating or recalling the distinction between the two periods of the building.
Okay, you're talking about the balustrades.
Yeah, the balustrade, I'm
okay.
sorry, bulkhead, wrong
Yeah,
word,
okay.
balustrade. I think that that many kind of alluring comments have been made about the globe. I would urge the applicant to strongly consider doing the globe as part of the application, because I think it's a key element of restoration to this very, very large building. I think that the gates at the main entry would be a mistake. Even though there is precedent for McKinley and White buildings to have gates at recessed areaways, this building already has had its front denuded once. I don't think that by closing that space, which was meant to be public and which has been kind of part of the public realm of the streetscape for so long, I don't think that would be a good idea. And to the core issue, I mean, I think that the general strategy of trying to pull the spaces down into the public realm and keep them part of the public access is an excellent, laudable strategy. Now, it's based on this approach of the two tiers, and it's also based on a concept of trading. Right? We're trading something, but we're getting the whole way. You know? And I think that that's maybe heretical, but I think it's an interesting approach. I think, though, that there has to be a clear line between that which is landmarked and that which is not. And I think having bedrooms, closets, bathrooms to be landmarked interiors is nuts. It would be okay with me personally, with probably not others, that the second floor offices, which are to be cut up into miscellaneous interiors of someone's private apartment, if they can't be relocated, it's plaster work, which is an accessible, easily replicable thing. I would say that if these artifacts of the decorative plaster elements cannot be similarly relocated to public spaces, I'd be willing to give them up as landmark spaces if the clock tower and its base were maintained as condominium spaces, so that it was not part of a person's apartment which needed access through it. I think that the notion of having to gain access through a person's private space to get to the clock tower would make it practically unworkable. I understand that the clock tower and its mechanism room would not be a public venue like a ballroom, but I think one should not at the same time leap to the other extent of saying that therefore we should make it into his living room, and therefore every time we have to go to do any maintenance at all, that we have to go through his living room. And similarly, that's where the trade comes in. The law cannot stipulate that the clock be used and always be running. However, if we're talking about trading, I think that one could arrange a trade where such a mechanism could be enshrined in use, and the clock could run. And it could run in such a way where the staff could confer with the horological societies and figure out a way to make the thing minimally operational, where you didn't have to have a guy come up every 2 weeks, but where you maybe used it or maintained it or somehow had it to be preserved in a way that was appropriate to that field of endeavor, even if it were not strictly within the landmarks law.
But wait, okay, so just so that I understand, are you suggesting that the functioning of the clock should continue as a hand-wound clock?
No, I'm saying that the functioning should continue, because I think that it's practically difficult to require a condominium to employ a clock winder into perpetuity for the next 100 years. I think, however, it is. I'm not a clock expert, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it is possible. Maybe what I'm imagining is that there might be a way to retain the use of the mechanism and electrify that mechanism, or to have an electrical mechanism operate the clock and keep the non-functioning mechanism in good condition and visible to those for whom it is of interest. I don't know. I defer to others to kind of cut that baby in half, but I think there must be a better compromise.
Okay, so it's similar to, I think, what I was saying, that those spaces somehow are not privatized.
Right.
And also for the same reasons, which they seem like impractical spaces to privatize, quite frankly.
If you've got a quadruplex, I'm sure you could find some use for that space.
Well, one space has just got the big mechanism. I don't know. You're right, you could, but it's...
Great for art.
But I think we should really step away from this idea of us trying to require somebody to work on a project. And I think it will only come back to haunt us because it's an impossible, it seems like it's impossible for us to enforce. And I think the agency has other things that we have to do, which is really within our jurisdiction, and we should be doing that. So it's a small thing, but I don't think we should push that. So that was just on that point that you were making, like, why not? So, okay, other comments? I think some of your points were, I would agree. I think Michael was suggesting that as well, that if historically the balustrades were different, there's no reason to make it unified. I think you want to recall that because it shows that the building was built it had a history of development. And I think that the gates to the main, that seems easily done. I would just talk, on the bulkhead, I think that my concern is, it seems very minor. If the height of the 13th floor is not changing, I thought it looked, from what I could tell, I thought it was increasing at height, but if you can't increase the height, that's fine. I'm concerned about the fact that it moves forward along, I guess it's Lafayette, and you have what you call the pavilion or the cupola. I think you want to make sure that that does not get cluttered with the fact that you have a penthouse that's moving. I think you want that to remain visible almost from all sides, and that it doesn't sort of get eclipsed with the penthouse. So I think that's something you can do. You could just set the penthouse back, and or at least take it back to the line where it is currently, and so that you can see the cupola or the pavilion as it is right now. I think that the 13th or the 14th floor penthouses, maybe they're not that visible because they're more centrally located, but I would really think you should see how to get those mechanicals that stick out, try and find a way to mitigate those as well. All right, other comments? Yes.
A couple of things. Sorry to continue this, but with regard to I absolutely agree with everything that Michael has said, frankly. I mean, that's my baseline. For me, the issue with the clock is accessibility. I think the gentleman, the clock guy left. There are two parts to every clock. Well, there are three. There's the case, there's the works, and there's the face. What the public sees here is the face. And I come from a long line of horologists, and that only has to do with clocks, I assure you. The works are what are important to the guys in the National Association of Watch and Clock Collectors. And if there's some way that they can get up to see that thing, it's wonderful. That space, I've been up to that clock, and it was freezing. One of the best things that you can do is have an environmentally stable space for a clock. That clock is operating in a space that is horrible for clocks. And so for me, having visited probably 36 clock museums, they rarely have all the clocks working. So to have that clock just there as an artifact, somehow accessible, is perfect. If you can somehow get those faces to be operating in another way, that would satisfy the public. That's what they want to see. Okay, so I'm done talking about clocks. I still have an uneasiness about that hierarchy of interior spaces, and as horrible as I will be to say this, I would like for us to do a site visit there. I would feel much more sanguine about my decisions here in that way. The other thing that I would say, that I don't know if we have the ability to require it, but if there are historic spaces that are going to become privatized or are going to in some way be obliterated or modified, that there be photographic documentation, high quality photographic documentation, HABS quality documentation of those spaces before anything happens to them.
I think they could easily do that. I think the idea of photographing these spaces before it's relocated, for example, right? And the highest quality. And I think the site visit, you know, you can work with our staff, and we could work with the applicants for anybody who would like to go and see those spaces.
Otherwise, this is a magnificent effort.
Yes. Yes, Roberta?
I agree with what the said. But I have two other little points, and that is I also agree with what you were saying about the high end. And I think that that is something that they could look at. We're talking about the bulkheads, we're talking about the bulkhead's position as it relates to existing structures on the roof now. But also the whole question of, I guess I'm still concerned about the height of the elevator and still want them to see.
Right.
To see how to get rid of that, because I think that one view where the elevator just rises up and seems to go is that needs to be looked at. And I think that the other question is the fire escapes, and if we think that removing the fire escapes and replacing them with balconies is the best way. I would prefer that they either keep them or remove them, but if they remove them, to not have the balconies, just to restore the building facade and the windows as they were originally.
Right.
But
I think what happens
I think we have to
is, and
discuss.
I'm guessing this, I mean, I didn't have an issue with this. I thought it was kind of creative. If they take if I remember from their presentation, the fire escape was not like the earlier on it was put on, but it has created all those doors, and so those doors have somehow been remain and now are open into a balcony. But if we ask them to, if we think the balcony doesn't really, was never intended for this building, and we find that it detracts from what this is intended, then I think we should look at something where they show us what it would mean to remove those balconies and how to restore these back to its original buildings, original windows.
I guess I'm only thinking this because it is an individual landmark, and that is sort of an oddity to do the balconies.
Right, it is. You're right. The building wasn't designed with balconies, and it's a creative solution, but it's not the historic.
Anyway,
condition.
we could think about.
And I think they should respond to us on that issue. Any other comments? Yes.
I think it was on Michael's list, but restoring the globe.
Yes, I know they spoke about it. Some of the drawings show it, so it's very exciting. And I think I understand that the design, you cannot bring the globe back to its design.
We tried to find the original globe, and we thought we found it, but we didn't, and it's nowhere to be found.
You mean the original design?
Yes, yeah.
Okay,
No, the original globe.
So if you didn't get the original globe, is there a way, because we've seen other people who've restored pavilions on top of buildings. Are you looking at that? That would act.
Look, we built an exact replica in Florida because the building, the historic
Right.
landmark building, was
So-
structurally unsound.
Okay, so your proposal could include the restoration of the globe.
I didn't know.
I think it was just not clear that was.
Replication of
Could be
a
even here.
globe or something appropriate
Right.
for that with you, of course, yeah.
Well, we would like to see, if you have the original design, isn't that what we'd like to see?
Yeah.
Okay, that was the question.
Pictures.
Hey, do your best. Do your best with what you got.
But we tried to, I met someone who was a former executive of New York Life, and she had described this exhibit in their their current headquarters and thought it was the globe. We sent a team over, and it wasn't.
Okay.
We've had other examples here where people have done their best, and a 80% approximation at 150 feet in the air is probably better than nothing.
Okay. All right. If there are no other comments, we can close the hearing, and I'm sure you'll get, okay, close the hearing. Thank you all for a very long day.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Comments made. It was a great project. Thank you very much. Thank you. We'll answer your questions when we're done. Thank you.
Yes, yes. Uh-huh. So I'm going to go.